What's up, Notjust developers? Today is a special day. Today I'm coming at you with a huge project. It's going to be a full stack Stack Overflow clone. Yeah, full stack Stack Overflow clone. Yeah, that's exactly what we're going to do today. And we're going to do that as a mobile application by using the real Stack Overflow API so that you can have and browse Stack Overflow right on your mobile phone. It's going to be a great educational tutorial for you. It's going to be fun, and we're going to cover both the front end and the back end integration. So there is a lot of valuable content that I prepare for you today. And also everything is beginner friendly and also step by step. Like I have all the steps that you need to follow in the guide I'm going to provide you in a moment. But first, let's have a look at what exactly we're going to do today. So this tutorial, exactly this video, is going to be split into three parts. Firstly, we're going to build the user interface of Stack Overflow using React Native. After that, we're going to convert the Stack Overflow REST API to a GraphQL API using StepZen. And after that, we're going to query the GraphQL API from our application. And by the end of this video, you're going to have a functional application that actually queries the data from Stack Overflow, displays it, and you can search and navigate all the questions and answers there in a mobile application. So we're going to build a couple of screens, the home screen where you'll be able to see the default questions, and also you're going to be able to search, and the details page where you'll see more information about the question and also the answers to that question. Something very interesting here is the ability to render Markdown, and these are like code snippets and actually images. So this is something unique to this project, and I believe you will enjoy it a lot. So for that, we're going to use React Native, Expo, and Expo Router because that's the best way to build cross-platform mobile applications. And on the backend side, we're going to use StepZen. And we're going to actually also use the Stack Overflow REST API and then create a very thin layer on top of that using StepZen, which is going to allow us to create a GraphQL API. And then we're going to query it inside our application. This video is actually sponsored by StepZen, so a big thank you to StepZen for helping us create this tutorial and bring this one to everyone here on YouTube. If you're not familiar with StepZen, we already did a couple of tutorials with them. I enjoy working with StepZen a lot because it helps us build GraphQL APIs very easily with a couple of lines of code. And every time our job as developers is simplify, I really enjoy it because it saves us a lot of time. So as I said, what exactly StepZen is doing is it integrates with different backend building blocks. For example, you might have a SQL database, or you might have a REST API, or even a GraphQL API. And with StepZen, you can connect them together and create a GraphQL layer on top of them. So more details you're actually going to see by the end of this tutorial, because we're going to actually get our hands dirty and write and build this GraphQL API. But for now, you can create your free account and be ready until when we get there. The link you can find in the description below. And thank you again, StepZen, for sponsoring the video. So this is the plan for today. I think we can get started, and because we have quite a lot of things to do today. So let's get started. Hello everyone in the chat. How are you doing, guys? I think I'm overexposed, right? Too much light? Maybe. Hello from India. Hello. So if you already feel that you're overwhelmed because we are using a lot of technologies, don't worry. As I said, this tutorial, I do it with everyone in mind. Like, it's going to be very helpful for people with already experience with React Native, with building mobile applications, but at the same time, it's going to be possible for beginners as well, because I provide the step-by-step guide that you can actually find at notjust.dev/project/StackOverflow. And actually, I'm going to open it up somewhere here. And basically, we're going to have here like all the steps for building the application, some snippets, very important, all the layouts that we'll have to build. So it's going to be quite easy to follow. And if you get started for all the process, you're going to be able to compare with the code there to know where you need to fix something. The next step is, of course, download the asset bundle. There you'll find some dummy data that we will definitely need today because it's a lot of data. So to get started, before we implement the API, we're going to use some dummy data that you can find in the description below. And with that being said, I think we are actually ready to get started. So here, I think I need the camera. And if you open up the step-by-step guide, here at the top is the guide for us to start working and start creating our Expo project. Open it up on the side. I'm not going to reference it too much, but it actually contains everything as we are doing it. But I really want to code everything together with you here and explain every single line so that everyone understands and can not only build this application and have it on your phone, but actually understand what's happening there and why we're doing certain things. So let's get started and let's go ahead and create a new project with Expo. So I'm gonna zoom in a bit so you can see better. I hope you do. Let's go ahead and go somewhere here. And to create a new Expo project, we are going to use, to create a new Expo project, you don't need to have anything installed other than Node.js and npm. Because having npm, you also have this npx command, and with that we can call npx create expo. Let me clear. With that we can run npx create expo up. I also prefer to add the @latest to get the latest version of create expo up, and here we need to provide the name of the application. The name is going to be, let's say, StackOverflow, and I also want to start not from scratch, but I want to start with an example that already had the Expo Router installed. So the example is called with router, and that will use a template that has Expo Router installed. So it's going to save us a couple of minutes as well to install and set up everything. Let's wait until npm installs all the dependencies. Come on. And while we're waiting this project to be installed, I see a question. Vadim, can you tell us what are the criteria that lead you to choose Expo or React Native CLI? Basically, nowadays, this question or decision is very simple. Like, I always use the Expo. And a couple of years ago, like I said that a couple of times, and I'm going to repeat it again. Like a couple of years ago, when you got started with React Native, right from the beginning, you had to make a choice. Do you want to go with React Native CLI, with Bayer workflow, or with the Expo? And at that point in time, going with Expo means that it's much easier to get started and you get the benefit of using some of the tools that Expo provide. But at that point, there were some limitations. For example, when you had to work with some native code or native packages. Nowadays, Expo is at a completely different level, and using config plugins, we are able to use any kind of native code with Expo projects. So at this moment, it's a no-brainer. When you get started with React Native, go ahead and start with Expo, and you're going to thank me later. And by the way, Expo is not sponsoring anything. These are my pure opinions. So now that our project is ready, let's go ahead and open it in Visual Studio Code like this, Stack Overflow. If you don't have this one, just simply open Visual Studio Code and from this menu, open and navigate to the project, and you'll find it there. So I'm gonna make it like this. Zoom in a bit as well so you can see. And when we are in the Visual Studio Code, let's go ahead and open a terminal. You can do this from the top, new terminal, or with the shortcut. And from the terminal, I want to start the development server. the development server, we can start with npm start, and that will start the Metro bundler from where we can run our application on different devices. The easiest way is to download the Expo Go application from the market. It's available both for Android and iOS and scan this QR code, or if you have some emulators or simulators, run it locally. So that's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna press I to run it on iOS. And here we should have, just for you to be able to see like what I'm coding here. Hello from Gabon. Thank you for your answer. You're welcome. You always come up with big projects and clone projects. Please do some small projects like recipe app, fitness app, or weather app. Please do small projects too. Yeah, like it's always like I want to do the biggest stuff because that's actually what you guys enjoy. Like I'm pretty sure you can find a lot of React Native weather application or to-do applications out there. But what differentiates the notjust.dev channel is the depth and the scale of a project that we're building. And yeah, but thank you for the advice. Maybe we can do some easy projects as well. Back to our project. Our application, when it's running on our device, we see the welcome screen. The welcome screen initially says that, hey, press on this button to get started, because at the moment, as you can see, we do not have the app directory. So if I press this button, that automatically creates our app directory. And in Expo Router, all the files that are inside the app directory, they will be mapped to screens. So this is a new concept. This is a file-based navigation system. And if you don't have experience with Expo Router, it's going to be interesting for you to learn and to see how easy it is to manage the navigation stack. But the only thing is that, remember, everything that is inside app directory, this is a screen in our application. It is managed automatically. We're going to see a bit later how we can create new screens. But yeah, for now, like, for the rest of the code that we're going to write, like components and snippets and dummy data and so on, we should not put it inside our app directory. For that, I would like to create a src directory where we will work and put all our source code. For example, here we can also write components. Perfect. Before we get started, actually, let's bring in the dummy data that we will need, that we will depend on. So for that, download the asset bundle that you can find in the description below. Open it up, unzip it, and let me also find it. So here is the asset bundle, and it will contain that data folder. So just drag and drop it in the root directory, copy folder, add folder. Let's copy folder. So now, copying the folder, we have a new directory in the root of our project with dummy data. And here I have provided you two JSON files. One for questions, like can't run migration with migration run. I have a React Native Expo project and so on. And one with answers. It's an array of answers. You're going to see that this is quite similar to what StackOverflow is answering. Basically, I downloaded those files to make it much easier for us to get started. Okay, so speaking about Expo Router, I'm not sure if I want to show you at this moment, but whenever we have to, like, every file here in our app directory is going to be a page. For example, if I create here a new file like home, that's going to be a new page when we navigate to the /home. Whenever we have to write some code that is needed in all the screens, this is basically called like layout code. For example, if we have some components that are being shared between two screens. Let's say a tab navigator that should be visible when navigating between the two screens. So basically, stuff related to the navigation, this is layout. And in Expo Router, to do that, what we have to do is create a new file here in our app directory called _layout. index.js. And here, let's define the function root layout. Come on, layout. This is going to be an arrow function that will return. It will return, what I want to do here is to display a stack navigator because I want the header there. So let's import stack from Expo Router and simply render the stack here. We'll add the, stack, and let's close it right away, and advanced export default root layout. Just by doing that, we already see the header here. So without this stack here, we didn't see the header. So I needed that header. That's why we have a stack that added the header with the name of our page index at the top. If you want to adjust the name of a page, what we can do is we can open up this stack. And because Expo Router behind the scenes is using React Navigation, we can adjust the options and configuration of our stack.screen in a similar way of how we were doing it in React Navigation. The name that we want to target is this index file. So we should say index, and the options, I want to change the title. So inside the options, I'm gonna provide title, I don't know, home screen or Stack Overflow, something like that. Yeah, home is nice. I'm gonna add this. I'm not sure like if you have this error like with red warnings, but yeah, for me I have it, and what I have to do is to create this JSON config file. This is actually optional, like it's just to get rid of that red squiggly line, and for JSX I provided React JSX. That's it. Now should go away. Yeah, perfect. Okay, so we have a stack screen, we see it on the top, and we are ready to get started. Let's open up index.js, and here is where we're gonna write the next code for our homepage. Let's have a look at what is going to be the first component that we have to create, and for that I'm going to open the guide from the website. So after creating the layout, what we have to do is we have to start rendering one question. When I build React Native applications, it's really easy when you think in terms of reusable and reusable components. Basically, when you look at one page, think about what components you will need there, what building blocks you'll need, and by building your user interface this way, it's going to be much more easier to put everything together because you're going to have to work with only small pieces of code, only small components. And then as a puzzle, you're going to put everything together to see what you have, to have like a proper user interface. So if you look at them, actually Stack Overflow, let's open it, not staging, but Stack Overflow. If we look at the Stack Overflow here, maybe we can, I don't know, let's search for React Native. And let's put it in the phone view like this. So when we look here, we see a lot of text, but if we focus our attention on only one question, and if we develop that component first, it's going to be much easier to create this home screen. So I had a screenshot here, and let's go ahead and start developing this component. Okay, so I'm gonna right away create a new component inside source component called question list item.js, and here let's define the question list item component, which is a function that returns some JSX. What we have to do is to make sure to export default question list item. And here we can start by rendering a text like hello, just to see that it's there. Let's make sure to import this text component from React Native. Should I zoom in a bit more? So far, yeah, I can do it. So make sure to import text from React Native, render the hello here, and let's go back to our application index. And instead of rendering all of this hello world, let's delete this view. Let's leave only the container. And inside this container, let's go ahead and import our question list item from one directory above, source components question list item. And in order to render it, we do it as we would render like a default React Native component like a view. So angle bracket, question list item, and then we can self-close it right here. And what we see on the screen is the hello there. And we can also display multiple question list items on the screen. Perfect. Let's clean a bit these styles because we removed some of these components from our page, and we only have the styles for the container. So we don't need this title, subtitle, and main. And for the container itself, I also would like to give some background color white. I don't think we need that much padding, so around 10 padding will be enough. And I also don't think we will need to align the items in the center. So let's delete align item center to have our items start from the left. Okay, now let's move to our source component question list item and start developing the question list item. I'll go ahead and actually import some data so that we start working right away with data instead of writing a lot of stuff ourselves. So remember we imported this dummy data folder in our root folder, and here we have information about questions. Let's go ahead and import this JSON of questions in our question list item. So import questions from one directory up, we go into the source, another directory up, we go into the root, then we go into the data, and then we go into the questions like this. And the questions is an object with items, which is an array of a lot of questions. Let's go ahead and grab the first question from here by accessing items at position 1. So question equal to questions.items at position 0 actually, sorry. Array starts at 0, right? So now if instead of this hello, I'm gonna write the curly brackets in order to be able to access the JavaScript variable, and if I'm gonna write question dot, let's see what do we have here, title, yes, question dot title, we see already can't run migration with migration true. And if I change the number here, it's going to be another title. So that's already good. We have access to the data that we have to display. I think the first step is going to be just to ignore the styles for a bit and just see what information do we have. So if we think about the structure of our question, the quality of this screenshot is so low. If we think about the structure, what we see is at the top we have a line with some statistics about the question. Number of votes, answers, and views. Then we have a title. Then we have the body, some tags, and finally the date. So let's go ahead and display them just simply on the screen just for us to have them. So let's go here. And what do we need? Because we're going to have a lot of things, let's put everything inside a view. View. And here we're going to start with a title. But actually the first thing is not the title. The first thing is the line with the stats. So the text will be, I don't know, let's say 1 vote. Then we have 2 answers and 66 views. we need to make sure to import view from React Native, like this. And yeah, we see them at the top. In order to render this dot in between the texts, what you can do is simply Google dot in the middle symbol. And that's actually like a character that you can simply copy and paste in your code like this, and you'll simply have that dot without having to do any kind of styles or weird hacks. Okay, but all of these are static text, like the numbers themselves are hard-coded. What I want is to actually take it from the question. If we look at the question, we have this data. We have the view count, we have, like the view count. Let's start with the view count. And it's this one, the last one. So instead of 66, let's go ahead and delete it, replace it with curly brackets, and let's access question dynamically, question.view_count to render specifically from that item. And if I will change here, we see that the number of views actually changes and is coming from the data. That's the same for the answers. So it's question.answerCount. And for the votes, that's going to be question.score, I think. There is score, yeah, the score. So 0 votes, 0 answers, 7 views. Perfect. One thing to mention here is my editor automatically added this syntax. Like basically, by creating this curly bracket portal, it added an empty space. Because without this, if the text is moved to a new line, there will be no space between this number and this dot on your user interface. Even if you put it and then save, it automatically deletes it from here. So that's why we, in these cases, to add a space, you can do it like through JavaScript like this. Okay, perfect. So the next step is our title. Then what do we have? Then we have the body. So after the title, let's go ahead and render the body. And we're gonna do this by accessing question dot, I think it's body underscore markdown. Body markdown, yes. But as you can see, that's a lot of text. In Stack Overflow, we are interested only in the beginning, like only in a couple of lines. So if you want to limit how much text do you want to render, you can specify the number of lines to the text here, and let's specify 2. And in this case, I only render 2 lines for our body. Okay, perfect. What's next? Okay, next we have the tags and the time. Before we actually get into the tags, that's gonna involve like dynamically looping and rendering through this data. Let's actually stop for a moment, add a bit of style here, and then move to the next step. So to style in React Native, what we need is the style sheet from React Native. We can actually style them inline, so we can provide styles here, like, I don't know, background color, pink. But it's recommended to separate your rendering logic from your styling logic. For that reason, what we're gonna do is below, we're gonna define the styles object that we can create using style sheet. And inside this style sheet, let's go ahead and create some styles. Here we need to provide the styles for what? For our main container. So container, it's going to be the view that contains everything. Then we have the stats for our, let me just make sure that I use the same names so that you can reuse them from the guide. So this text is going to be the stats. Then we have the title. And then we have the body. So now here for the style, what we can do is we can send the styles.container to this view, and everything that we're gonna provide here, like a background color pink, is going to be assigned as the styles of this view. So let's move on to assign all the styles that we have created. So this one is styles.stats. This one is styles.title. And this one is styles.body. Okay, so starting with the title, the first step is I want to increase the title on Stack Overflow is some kind of blue. So let's change the color of this title. So the color is going to be, I have actually got the color here. So it's 0063BF. Okay. Do we need to make it like more bold? Maybe I can zoom in a bit, like make this bigger, just for you to see better like what we have there. What do you say? Is this better? I think so. I also want to decrease a bit the font size of our stats because it's a bit smaller than, it should be a bit smaller than the title. So font size of 12 should be better. I will delete the background pink from the container, and I will only add probably some spacing inside this container, like padding 10. Yes, and to separate multiple questions from each other, let's add a border on the bottom of each question. So border bottom width can be 0.5, and border color can be light gray. And that will add this border on the bottom, and when we have multiple questions, it's going to be easier to separate between them. Okay, so yeah, like if we look at this one, if we look here, we see that the body is actually the smallest text on this screen. So for the body, let's decrease the font size to either 12 or even lower, like to 11. And for the color, we can use a dim gray, like something that just barely is visible, just not to get a lot of attention from the user. So that's much better. And what else? What else? Should we add some margin for our title in order to give him some room to breathe? We can do that by margin vertical 5, and this will add on top and on the bottom. And I think we are good. Yes, it's already looking pretty, but we are just getting started. Because as I said, we still have to implement the tags, the list of tags. If we look in our data question here, the text is an array of strings. So what we have to do is to dynamically loop through this array and render these tags as separate tags on this screen. So how do we do that? Well, let's go ahead and below this body, let's start by looping through all of the tags. To do that, we're going to open this the portal, the curly bracket, and let's access the tags, the array of tags. So question.tags. And what we can do next is by mapping from a string to a GSX component, we can render something on the screen for every single item in our array. So to do that, we're going to use the map function. The .map function expects a callback function that will receive that each item individually. So here we're gonna receive a tag, and what we should return back is something to render on the screen. For example, a text with that tag itself. So if I'm gonna do that, you already see 3 tags on the screen: React Native, Expo, and type ORM. And if you change the question here, it's going to be even more. Okay, let's go ahead and start. At this moment, I'm not sure why we do not see the error. No, actually we see the error. So at the moment, React Native is complaining that each child in a list should have a unique key. So what does that mean? That means that we are dynamically rendering a list of components in this by mapping through all of our tags, but we are not assigning some unique IDs to these components. And what we can do is to provide the key property of our text of the first component inside our map, and let's provide a unique key that will identify this component. What it can be, usually it's the ID of a thing, but because these are simply strings, we can actually use that tag itself as the key. And now React Native will know better like how to re-render these components because it will identify them by this unique key. Okay, perfect. Now let's go ahead and add a style here for our styles.tag. And because I want to put all of these tags in the same line, I will have to encapsulate them inside a view. So let's create this view around our list of tags. I can do here tags. And let's give this view a styles.tags. Now let's define the styles below tags and our tag. For the tags, what do I want? For the tags, I want to render them in the same line. To do that, I'm going to provide flex direction row, and that will render all the children, basically all the tags, in the same row. As we can see, there are a lot of them. They will move out of the screen. So what we can do is we can specify the flex wrap to say, hey, if the items do not fit on the same line, wrap from a new line and display them there. So that's what we see, flat list wrapped from a new line. And taking advantage of the new style property in React Native, the flex gap property, we can easily add spacing between our items by providing the gap property here, like gap 5. We'll add 5 pixels between horizontally and vertically. And to see that better, we can add a background color to the tag, for example, red. And here we see the 5 pixels. Without it, everything is going to be close together. Let's change the background color from red to the actual background color that StackOverflow is using. So it's E1 EC F4. And for the text color, it's going to be 39739D. Okay, that looks like StackOverflow. Let's continue adding some more styles. For example, for this tag, we need some padding inside it because the text is really cramped there. So let's add some padding, like 5. Let's make the borders a bit round. So border radius 3 will be enough. But because it's a text view, like what we're doing here, it's not a view, but it's a text. Simply adding the border radius 3 will not change anything. Even if you add here 20, nothing will change. Because you have to also specify that you want the overflow of this component to be hidden. And only that is going to take effect. So let's go back to 3 here. And it's slightly rounded corners. And let's also decrease the font size from the default 14 to 12. Yes, perfect. And I think I will have to add some spacing on the top. So for the text container, let's add margin top. Should it be 10? Yeah. So now it looks better. And if I change the question, yes, it looks perfect. Okay, so the last thing from this component is displaying the time here when it was asked. So what we can do here is we can, after the view with tags, let's render here a text with the text asked and the question dot, if we look here, there is the property creation date. Question.creation date. That would say like asked at this timestamp. This is the date in the format as a timestamp. And what we can do is we can create a date value out of this creation date, like this. New date. And we have to actually get the string value. So, but not the actual string value, but yeah, like toDate string. So what does that say? It says Tuesday, January 20, 1970. That doesn't look like a right date when the migration was, when someone had issues with migration. But usually the problem is that timestamps are sometimes specified as seconds, sometimes as milliseconds. And I think that this creation date is in seconds and the date expects milliseconds. So we can simply multiply by 1000, and this is Wednesday, May 31, 2023. This looks much more realistic. If you look in the design here, you'll see that in cases that there is enough space, I don't see it here, but in cases there is enough space, the date will actually be on the same line with the text. Actually, you can see here on the screenshot. So for that reason, let's move this text inside our view after we render all the tags. That's what we're gonna see. And if I'm gonna change this to 1, it's going to be there. But we want to align it to the right. So let's add a style property here. Styles.time, and let's style this time a bit. So in order to render it all the way to the right, we can use a little trick from Flexbox by assigning margin on the opposite side, margin left, auto, and what that will do, it will put as the maximum amount of margin on the left side of this component. And this way it will push it all the way to the right. Let's also decrease the font size to 12, and the color should be something like dim gray. Yeah, looks good. Now it's a bit not centered horizontally with our tags. So if we add here to the tags property one more align items center, now this text will be perfectly aligned. I'm not sure if you can see it, but it's perfectly aligned with our values here. Yes, now you can see it better. You lost weight, man. That's the first comment I see when I look into the comment chat. Thank you very much. Yeah. I'm not sure when was the last time you watched the videos, but if you're talking like from compared with 1 year ago, yeah, definitely. Okay, so we have done a lot of stuff now, to be honest. Like we are done with rendering one question. So it's a lot of text, it's a lot of styling, but I hope you understand all the way and all the steps that we took in order to render this simple question list item on the screen. So I think what I'm gonna do is I'm going to commit this in order for you, if you are familiar with Git, to be able to later watch through these commits and to git commit to be able to see exactly like what we've done at every single step in this application. So this is question list item. Did I add everything? Yeah, perfect. Okay. So guys, now that we have this question list item and we are able to render it from our application like this, the next step is to send data to this component. Because at the moment, if we want to render two questions, one on top of each other, they will both render the same question because the data is managed inside this component. Whenever we have to send data from a parent component to a child component, that's where we are using props. So first of all, in our index.js from our application, basically on our page, here is where we will need the data. So let's get the questions from one directory up data questions. And let's go ahead and send through the props, similar to how we are sending style property to the view. Let's send here a new property called question. And the data of that property is going to come from this question.items at position 0, for example. And for the second one, let's go ahead and send the same, but the data is going to be coming from the position 1 of items. So this is how we are sending properties to a component. Now, on the component side, to receive that question, like we're not going to need these import questions and questions anymore, because we're going to receive it through properties. And to do that, how it's happening, the properties are the first and only argument of our functional component. So they are here, props. And this props is an object that contains fields with these names that we provided. So if we provided here a name question, what we can do, we can access props dot, for example, props dot question. An easy way to get the question out of a props in the same line is to destructure it from here, doing this. And now, as you can see, the first one renders the first question and the second one renders a completely different one. And this way, from our index, from our parent component, we are able to send different data to our child component, and they will render it. What that allows us to do is to render all the questions that we have in our data, not only manually rendering two of them. We already saw a way to render a list of things using a mapping like this. But whenever you have like a more complex scenario, like rendering full page lists, where you need some additional functionalities, like basically whenever you have an infinite list or a list that is quite huge, in that case, you can use the flat list from React Native. And I'm going to comment out these two components because instead of them, we're going to use a flat list. So flat list expects two required properties. The first one is the data that we need to render, and this data should be an array of items. So what is the array of items? It's our questions dot items. And it also expects a render item function where we have to specify how do we want to render every single item from this array of data. So the render item is a function. So let's define the function. It will receive an object that contains the item that we want to render, and that item will be one of these items from that array. If I open the data questions, so it's going to be the first time it renders this one, then it's going to be the second one, and so on. So basically the item is one question. So for every question, what we have to do is to render this component. like this, question list item. And for the question, we're gonna send not this data, but the item that we are rendering. And this way, as you can see, we have a scrollable list of questions. I think we can remove a padding from the page itself. Yes. And we can scroll through this list, and all of this data is coming from our dummy data here, as you can see. So that's how simple it is to put everything together, a list of data, a component, we put together with a flat list, and we have a functional scrollable list of information in our application. I think we can also disable the scroll indicator here on the left, on the right. I'm not sure if we need it, but you can do that with show vertical scroll indicator false. And that will hide it from the left. Perfect. From the right, sorry. So that's our homepage finished. We have everything that we need here on the homepage. In the next step, we're going to start working on the next page, which is going to be the details page. So before we do that, let's make sure to add everything. Let's say homepage. Flat list of questions. Perfect. So guys, how are you doing? I was so focused to deliver because I planned so much for today, and I really want to provide a very seamless experience for you to watch and build, especially for people that are watching afterwards. Guys, if you enjoy this video, and everyone actually, if you enjoy this video, make sure to subscribe to the channel and become part of our 1% club. And you might ask, what is the 1% club, Vadim? Do you want to know what's the 1% club? Give me just 1 second, I'm gonna show you. This is the 1% club. In the last month, in the last 28 days, we got 98% of watch hours from non-subscribers. So that means that 98% of you watching right now are not yet subscribed. So make sure to subscribe to the channel and write down in the comments that you are part of the 1% club. And I'll be very happy if you do that. It's helping us a lot to reach more developers. Where is my page? Here it is. Expo with web. If you are interested on that, with Expo Router, you not only build the application for Android, iOS, but it's also available for web out of the box. So if I go back to our bundler, and if I press W, this will open our application in the web browser. Let's see how it looks actually. You are in the 2%. No, it's actually 1%. And we looked for the most recent data, and it's actually less than 1%. It's 0.9%. So as you can see, our React Native application is working in the web browser as well. It's very zoomed in, but as you can see, it's working. We can scroll. Everything is working in the web browser. How cool is that? We're going to test it throughout the building it maybe in the browser more. Okay, let me see some comments. Vadim, do you have any feedback on Heroku services for deploying backend REST APIs? We can do some tutorials about that if you're interested, guys. Someone is asking about protected routes in Expo Router. We actually have implemented that in our Twitter application. So if you check our latest project where we integrate the backend with the frontend, in that video we show how to do protected routes in Expo Router. Are you going to do mutations? For this tutorial, I only plan queries because I want you to get to be easier for you to get started, because for queries you don't need an API keys, and to run mutations, basically to create new questions or to submit answers, you need to implement authentication and you need to register the application with Stack Overflow. But if you're interested, maybe we can do something in future. Can we develop a whole application on Stack? I'm pretty sure you can. So give it a try and let me know how it works. Yeah, I don't like, everything is possible with Stack. Okay, guys. So where are we at? We have created, we rendered one question list item. We render all the questions inside a flat list. What else? I think we can skip the search input for now. Or if you're interested on how to add a search input in our native stack, just follow this guide on our website. It's quite simple. You have to add this layout effect inside your page, and it will add them. Actually, yeah, let me just, no. If we need that, we're gonna get back and do it. The next step is the question details page. So question details page. Here, I'm gonna explain a bit how Expo Router is working. So for the question details page, whenever we press on one of these questions, we want to open the question details page. So that's going to be a new page. As I said in the beginning, in Expo Router, all the files inside our application directory, they become screens. They are mapped to screens. So to create the question details page, all we have to do is basically create a new file here, like details.js, and export something, basically render something. The question details page. And let's export it from here. From the mobile side, it's going to be a bit harder to navigate to this page. But if we run it on the, but we're going to get there. This is just for me to demonstrate you how everything is put together. So you can, for 5 minutes, you can just watch. Even less, 3 minutes. So let's open this project in browser, because it's going to be much easier to navigate to that page. All we have to do is to change the route in our browser to /details, because that's details. Did I write it correctly? It says unmatched, not found. Yeah, because I wrote it incorrectly. But if I go to the details, that automatically renders our screen with details. And if I do here, hello world, we see hello world on this page. So what does that mean? It means that, yeah, it proves the point. You can understand visually. You simply create files in our app directory, and they are mapped to URLs, which can be and to that URL, to that pages, we can navigate by using the / and the name of a component. If you'd have like directories, you'd have to put the /directory/file, for example. Because it's in our root folder, it's simply a page at the /details. Now, how do we navigate in our application to this page? For that, Expo Router, as you see, is working based on URLs, very similar to how navigation works on the web. So for that, we have a link component that we can use. So for example, if I open source question list items, we can as the first component inside our view, let's add a new link, open, that will navigate. Let's import this link from Expo Router, and let's use href where to the /details. So now if I press on this open, it redirects automatically to the details page, and I can go back and open a different one. The thing is that we want to open the details page not only when we press on this text thing, but on the whole component. So a link automatically renders the child as a text. So if we would wrap everything inside this link, and actually that's what you should do. Let's wrap all our view inside this link. If we press, wow, it works. Wait a second. I think Expo Router updated this because, yeah, previously you had to take a couple of more steps, and I gave them the feedback that it would be really nice to manage all of those details automatically. So as we can see right now, it actually navigates automatically. If it doesn't work for you, what you have to do, or what you had to do in the past, so I'm just gonna show you in order to make sure that for everyone it's working. So we had to transform our child view from a view to a pressable because it needs a component with onPress events. And for the link, we need to provide the asChild property in order to make sure that it passes the onPress to this child component. So now it works again, but as I see, for me, I don't have to do that. So I can simply go back because it's much easier, less properties, less code. And it still works, right? Let's see if on web it's working as well. So let's go to the home page. If I press, it redirects. Perfect. So that's how we navigate to a different screen. The next question is that on this details screen, we would need to render question with ID. But what ID? Where do we get the ID from? Well, if you look at, for example, Twitter or even StackOverflow, if I open this page here, what you will see is that the ID of a question, I'm pretty sure it's very small and you cannot see, but if you do it as well, like go to a page of StackOverflow question, you'll see that the ID of the question is actually inside the URL. So it's part of our path. So can we do that in Expo Router as well? For example, if we would go not to the details, but to the actual ID, so for example, 1, 2, 3, can we parse this string as the ID? Yes, we can do that using dynamic routes. So if instead of a static string details for our file name, if instead of that we provide a variable inside square brackets like ID, then this 1, 2, 3 will be parsed as the ID of the screen, of the page that we navigate to. How do we, like on one hand, we need to make sure that we navigate there. So in the components question list item, instead of redirecting to the details, we need to redirect to the question.id. So let's wrap this. Basically, I don't know, we can do plus question.id, or easier would be with template string slash and then the question.id like this. So slash question ID whenever we redirect there. Okay, but how do we get this ID inside our page? To do that, we have a hook called use search params, and using this hook, we get the ID using the name that we specified here in the file name. So here is the ID, so we can get the ID from use search params. Let's go ahead and render it on the screen just to double check if it's ID, if it's correct. Now it's undefined, but if I do it again, it's still undefined. Why? On the web, does it work? Yeah, on the web, if it's 123, it's 123. And if it's hello here in the path, it's going to be hello here. So what's up with our... Oh, because it's not question.id. If you look in the dummy data, the question has question ID. So instead of using question.question.id, it should be question.question_ID. And now, yes, now it actually sends the ID there. So that's perfect, because using that ID in the next screen, what we can do is we can basically, in the next step when we will implement the API, we're gonna query the API using that ID. For now, what we can do is probably get all the questions from our dummy data questions, and let's look for a question in that array by doing questions.find. And for every question, we're gonna look if the question.question_ID is equal to ID. This is the double sign operator, because if you put triple sign, it's not gonna work, because this ID is a string, but this ID is an integer. So we need double equal sign to compare them with strict rules around the types. So having this question, let's do if we didn't find the question, make sure to stop here by returning something. Let's return a text, question not found. So undefined is not a function. Oh, question.find, no, questions.items.find, because that's the array. Okay, but if it finds, we can say here, I don't know, question.title. Can't run migrations. If we click on the other one, it's exactly the one that we are clicking on. So now, based on the dynamic ID that we get from the path, we get the ID and we are finding this question in our array. Again, if you get into this question not found, make sure you have two equal signs here, not three. Now, instead of actually developing all the UI for the details page, because if we look at the Stack Overflow, I think we would be able to somehow reuse some of the component that we developed previously. And by adjusting just a little bit of styles, maybe we can save some time. So let's go ahead and let's duplicate the question list item component by copying it and pasting it. And let's call it question header. Let's open the question header and make sure to rename the file to the component to question header, just not to be confusing. It's still gonna work, but it can be confusing. And scroll down at the end where you export it as well, rename it. Now that we have this question header, let's go to the application id.js, and instead of rendering this view here, let's render the question header. Question header, and let's send the actual question that we want to render. Make sure to import it here at the top from the source components. And now if I'm gonna press on this, we see that it renders the question. I think I'm gonna encapsulate it into a view because I want to make the, come on, if it's like this, it needs brackets. Because I want to add some background color, white, just for the whole page to be white. What's happening? Yeah, this. And also flex 1 to make sure that the page expands all the way to the bottom. Okay, so we have something there. Let's go ahead and adjust a bit the styles here. What I want to do is I will change a bit the I'll change a bit the order of our title. I want the title to come first inside before the stats, like this. The title will have some. Let me remember what we had to do here. So we have first the title, then the stats. Then what? We have a separator. Yeah, we added a separator between the stats and the actual body. We added a separator. So let's go ahead and add a view that closes automatically with a styles.separator. Let's open up a page, and for that separator we can specify that it has a border bottom with 0.5 and a border color light gray, and that should add this border between the separator between the body and the stats, and we can add margin vertical, I don't know, 5 or 10 even, to have this spacing. Perfect. On the details page, the color of the title is not going to be blue, but it's going to be, what's going to be the title color? It's this grayish, 3B4045. And also it's a much larger font size. So let's increase it to 20. Something like this. Okay, so the title. Anything else? Yeah, I think also font weight is kind of a bold. So 500 will increase the font weight. And maybe if you want to make sure that there is more space between the lines themselves, you can increase the line height to 28. Yeah, that will give more space to breathe. Some margin vertical we already have. Okay. For the body, first of all, the body in this situation should not be clipped. So we should remove a number of lines from the body because we want to render the whole body like this. At the moment, it's not scrollable, but don't worry, because instead of making it scrollable now, in the next step, you're going to see what we'll have to do, and it will automatically become scrollable. So let's just go ahead in the body, maybe remove a color dim gray, or even change it to a different color. Remove a font, the font size, because we want it by default. But even the color, like this, it should be okay. And that's everything that we need there, right? Yeah, okay. If we forgot something, we can come back and add them later. Everything is still looking weird because we still have to do some processing on the text. We need to render the markdown, but that's coming just in a bit. Do you use Tailwind in your web projects? Yes, I use Tailwind for our notjust.dev project website. And yeah, I pretty much love it. And have you tried Native Wind for React Native projects? No, I haven't tried Native Wind. All right. So this is our question header. What we have to do next on the details page of a question, what you're actually interested usually is not the question itself, but the answers that you see below. So let's go ahead and start rendering some of these answers. So for that, inside our details page, app_id, should I commit everything? Question detailed page. Yeah, like this. So as I was saying, the next step is to start rendering our answers. So let's go ahead and actually create our component for our answer component, and we're gonna start from scratch. So new file, answer.answerListItem.js, and here let's do React Native functional export. This is a plugin that I have for React Native snippets. If you're interested, that helps me just create a boilerplate component. And having this answer list item, what we have to do is inside our application details page, we have to render these answers. How we're gonna do that? Well, we have the data about answers in a JSON file. So again, this is an object with items with multiple answers from StackOverflow, and we have to render them in a flat list. So first of all, let's import the answers from data answers and a flat list from React Native flat list. For a moment, let's comment out this return statement just to focus on the answers here without having this question header. So I'm going to comment it out, and below, let's go ahead and render a flat list with data, our answers, come on, answers, and with render item, let's define the function that for every answer, for basically every item there, will render a answer list item with this data answer equal item. So now if we go here, we don't see anything, because again, we have to access the data as answers.items. It should be an array. Make sure it's an array. So right away, we see a list of answer list item, because that's what we are rendering here. I will actually bring the view that provides styles for our page back to this flat list. Encapsulate it with that view like this, and now the background is white. Okay, let's go ahead and implement the rendering logic of our answer list item. First of all, we will receive a data about our answer here in the props answer, and we can access, for example, answer.body markdown, and it will render the actual answer here. It's a lot of information for these answers, but it will look much better and it will be much more readable when we will actually parse this markdown. I'm thinking, should we actually implement this component, or do you want us to get it from the website? Because we have here this is what we have to render. a component with two columns. On the left, we have some icons, the score. Here we have the information, and below the answered Monday. I think if we implement it like together, it's going to become a bit repetitive, because again, it's quite similar to how we render the question. Only difference, like we have something on the left. So I recommend just let's go ahead and grab this component from here and see basically how we can put everything together. So let's copy the answer list item from our guide, and let's bring it to our answer list item here. So if I paste it, let's hope that it will work. Yes, it actually works, and we saved quite a lot of time. Perfect. Now, as you can see, we have a list of answers. So what's interesting here? Like, we have the container and we have two columns. The first one is the left column that contains the information about the score and some icons, and the check mark if the answer is accepted, so we can understand which answer is actually accepted. Then the sibling is another view that renders the body and the time. And after that, like styles, so you can look more in depth into what we have here. Okay, so we have answers here. Let's go back to our details page in our app, id.js, and let's put everything together, like the question header and the flat list. Because at the moment, if we go to the details page, we only see the answers. We also want to see the question header. So if we copy this component and render it before the flat list, that's what you would expect to do. Like, first is the question header, and after that is the flat list. Well, that's not going to happen, because the flat list, like, first of all, the question header is going to be rendered, and everything else is going to be left for the flat list, but the problem is that there is no more space on the screen for that. So instead of that, what we want to actually do is the question header to be part of the flat list, and whenever we scroll the flat list, the question header to also be scrollable. So for that, we can provide to the flat list a list header component, and here is going to be a function that renders our question header. And in this situation, the question header now is part of a flat list, and when we scroll the question header, it scrolls basically the flat list of answers. So if we scroll, we get to these answers here. I'll find maybe something with less code. No, everything is with a lot of code. Oh, boy. So yeah, now we have implemented our details page of our question that also renders answers. So let's go ahead and do git add, git commit answers flat list, and we can move on to the next step. Oh, and the next step will actually, I was excited about this one because it will make our UI look better. At the moment, as you can see, like all of this body is not exactly how they, it's not exactly how they look on Stack Overflow. If we look at Stack Overflow, like there are links, there are code snippets, there may be even block codes and so on. So all of this data is actually markdown format. If you're not familiar with Markdown, that's basically the format that you would write the README file for your project. For example, README.md here. This is Markdown, and that's like what you use for GitHub to add some styles to your text files. So for example, if a line starts with one, how is this symbol called? Diaz. For me, it's Diaz. Hashtag, yes, sorry. If it starts with a hashtag, that will be transformed to a header 1. If it starts with 2, that's going to be header 2. This is a link for us, and so on. So you don't need to actually understand like every piece of the markdown if you don't already, because we are just going to use a library to help us parse all of this. And Katalin Bajak is asking, are you guys part of a 1% subscribers gang or not? Make sure to hit the red button below. Pretty sure it's red for you. And become part of a 1%. Let's see the power of our community. Are we going to use API or database? We're going to use the StackOverflow API. So yeah, it's going to be fun. It's going to be actually real data from StackOverflow. You're going to be able to use this application in day-to-day to look and search for StackOverflow. What's the difference between a self-closing view and a normal one? So basically, if you need inside the view to have children, for example, if that view is kind of a container that contains like some text and so on, that should be a normal view with a closing and opening tag, and inside it you put like the children. However, if you're using a view only for rendering, for example, a dot or a black square, basically it only needs for some styling purposes that you're going to adjust like with styles, like giving it a width, a height, and so on, but it doesn't have to have anything inside. In that case, you can use a self-closing view because yeah, it doesn't need children. But at the same time, you can use a opening and closing one without anything inside. That's also going to work. So that's why I use a self-closing tag for this divider thing, because it's a view that only needs to render this border color. It doesn't have to have any children inside it. So that's why. Is it free to subscribe to the YouTube channel? I don't know. Check it out. If you're asking if it's free, like the StackOverflow API, yeah, if it's public, it's free. And you don't even have to register. Like everything is just query it and that's it. Okay, so as I was saying, the next step for us is to parse Markdown. Actually, there is one very small step before that. And here I'm talking about, for example, here. What's going on here in this title? It says some digits, but it looks like a can't run migration with migration run through. So the data, the text that we see here is HTML encoded. So all the special characters like apostrophe, like double quotes, single quotes, the less than and greater than symbol, all of them will be encoded with an HTML encoder to make it safe for the web. But for us, like our platform does not decode them automatically. So what we have to do, let's go ahead and install a library called HTML entities that will help us decode this text and actually render the normal text. I'm sorry for that. So let's open the terminal, clear. Let's do npm install. It's called HTML entities. And let's press enter. HTML entities. You can also get the command copy paste from the docs, from the step-by-step guide. Okay, everything is installed. Now what we have to do every time we are using this data, basically if we look in the question, where we're using the title, where we're using the body markdown, and the same is for the answer for the body markdown, we have to decode it. So that's going to be in the source. Let's start with, on the home screen, we have this question list item. So let's start with here. To decode it, we're going to import decode from HTML entities. And where we're rendering the title, you can search here, question.title. Just wrap it into the decode function. And that should fix this problem here with can't run. And now we see the apostrophe, the can't run properly. And the same for other parts as well. Okay, and we can do the same with the body here, body underscore markdown. So we have question body markdown. Let's decode this as well. So 2 places in our question list items. Then moving on to the details page, like when we press on this, the title still shows with can't, with these weird characters. That's our question header. And here we have to also import decode. And for the title, decode the title. And also decode the body, here body markdown. Again, 2 places to decode. Now the title is fixed, can't run, and the body is also not displaying those weird characters. Okay, and the last step is in our answer list item. Here, let's go ahead and import decode from HTML entities, and we only have a body markdown. In this file, we only have to write it once. And now the answers will also be decoded. Perfect. So that was the first step of parsing and working with this data that we received from StackOverflow. The next one is going to be actually related to the markdown. So I explained already what markdown is. If you look at the answers, for example, or questions, you see that this is actually markdown. Like, I'm not sure. Question. Body markdown is of markdown type. So I was looking for some libraries for the React Native markdown, and it's pretty depressing. The situation is pretty depressing there. I found this React Native markdown display that has the most downloads. It has 35K weekly downloads. But the problem is that it's quite outdated, and the last publish was 3 years ago. I was looking for something else and I couldn't find a proper package, like React Native Markdown package. This one has less downloads. It was published 10 months ago. It's a bit more recent, so you can maybe look into this one. But yeah, like what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna use this React Native Markdown display because it does its job. Like I was trying to adjust some of the stuff. It was a bit buggy. So if you find a better solution to parse Markdown, feel free to use that. If not, let's go ahead and install this package. Let's copy the install command. And let's open the terminal and say npm install React Native Markdown display. Let's press enter. I think it has some, it depends on React version 16. Now we are using React version 18. So we have to just provide this legacy /legacy pure dependencies depths to override it and just say like, hey, we trust that it's gonna work. And yeah, now it's installed. Now let's go ahead and open our question header, because where we have to parse it, on the home screen we don't have to parse this markdown. I think it looks okay. However, on the details page here is where we have to parse it to properly render the question body. This one, question body. So let's have a look at the documentation if we have one. I think we had one a couple of minutes ago. Not sure where it disappeared. But yeah, we have to import the markdown. Yeah, it's pretty simple actually. So all we have to do is in question header, let's import the markdown component from React Native Markdown display. And for the text component that is rendering now the body markdown, let's replace it with this markdown and make sure that closing tag is also replaced. Now it doesn't have a style, and we can remove that from here. And what we see is somewhat parsed and rendered markdown. But I think it's pretty nice because it actually also has, like, for example, it actually has the image. It's a bit messed with the height and so on, but there is something. So that's how simple it was to render this markdown. Let's do the same for our answer. So in the answer list item, let's go ahead and import markdown from React Native Markdown display. And where we're rendering the body markdown here, let's replace it with markdown. So this way we will also, we will also parse the answers as markdown. And as you can see, there are some links which we can press and they are actually working. They're redirecting properly. So everything is working more or less okay. I'm not saying it's perfect, but it's okay. It has something. So yeah, I'm gonna stop here. I recommend you looking for the documentation, maybe finding some other library for the markdown. But if you still continue using it, there is the style prop that you can actually style the markdown. For example, you can style the text, you can style the links, you can style the code, and so on. But I will continue using the default styles that they provide. Okay, so with that being said, I can do git add, git commit, markdown parser. Okay, so what does that mean? We have a couple of pages. Everything is parsed properly, rendered correctly. Yes, there is this red warning, red error if you're working on iOS, saying that font family Courier is not a system font, just because this library for the code is trying to use the Courier. But for iOS version 15 and above, we do not have like the system font Courier anymore. So what you can do, like you can override the styles and change it, but don't worry about that. It's just an error. We can ignore it safely. What's the font you're using in VS Code? Speaking about fonts, to be honest, I'm not sure. You should definitely check the video that we have done with my Visual Studio setup. There I show like the font, all the setup, all the extensions that I'm using, the theme, and so on. Okay, so guys, as I said, we are pretty much finished with the user interface of this application. The next step is to go ahead and work on the API. We're going to integrate with StackOverflow API, but and in a moment we're going to analyze a bit this API, but I don't really want to integrate with a REST API. I really love working from a front-end perspective, from an application. I really like working with GraphQL APIs because we can specify what fields we want, we can get all the data that we need for a screen using one query instead of having to query the API multiple times. So for that reason, we're gonna take one more step to transform the StackOverflow REST API into a GraphQL API. And after that, we're gonna integrate and query it from our application. So that's gonna be the plan. Give me just 1 second. I'm gonna be back and we can start. Or yeah, let me grab like a coffee and I'm gonna be back. All right, I'm back. What are these? I just joined the stream. So what we're doing today, we are building a Stack Overflow mobile application. And so far we have finished 2 of the most important screens of the Stack Overflow application. The homepage that renders a list of questions. And the details page that renders the question details. It displays as a markdown. And also the answers below. Our next step is to integrate with the actual Stack Overflow API. So that's what is our next task. Is there a difference for traditional REST APIs versus setting up GraphQL? It's a very, the answer to this question is similar to the answer to all questions. It depends. So with that tutorial that we're doing today, there will be no difference. The Stack Overflow API is free, and the StepZen has a free plan that offers us quite a lot of requests per month. However, if you have to build your own API, and to host it somewhere, it really doesn't have a lot of difference if it's a REST API or a GraphQL API. You're gonna have to pay for the servers. So if you deploy it on AWS or on other services, you're gonna have to pay something. Being it a REST or a GraphQL doesn't make a lot of a difference. Thank you very much, Asad, for supporting. Okay, guys, so let's talk a little bit about the Stack Overflow API. In the step-by-step guide that you can find in the description below, here I have left some of the most important links that we will need to understand how the Stack Overflow API is working. So the first one is their documentation. So open it up here, and it's actually not the Stack Overflow API, it's the Stack Exchange. And if you know the Stack Exchange, they have more websites, not only Stack Overflow. Stack Overflow is for developers. There is also other Stack exchanges and websites. So they have a common API that helps us get data from all of these websites. What we're gonna do now is we're gonna filter only and query only the data from Stack Overflow, right? Okay. So, their API, what do we need to know about their API? yeah, the responses are in JSON. All their responses are compressed, and this is an important detail for us a bit later, but yeah, just remember that. The API usage is, there are a lot of public APIs, so if we scroll down here to see the actual endpoints, a lot of them do not need authentication. Some of them that are post requests, like accepting or upvoting or commenting, they actually do need authentication. So for today, we're gonna try to only use endpoints that do not need authentication, basically a read only. And yeah, to get this, we don't need any API keys, but the usage is throttled and it works based on IP. So it's advised like not to send a lot of requests at the same time. Like if we don't do anything crazy, we're gonna be good to go. Everything is gonna be perfect. And later, if you want to, for some reason, continue building this application, you can actually register your application and your rate limit will be much more than it is for the public thing. What else? What else? Okay, we're gonna check the documentation of every single method that we're gonna have to work with. For example, on the home page, what we will be interested in is in this list questions. So you can open this documentation, or you can open it here. It's not answers. It's, yeah. Let's actually open it from here. Open in a new tab, and here is the documentation for getting all the questions. As we, if we scroll down here, we can adjust a bit how we want everything to happen, like what filtering do we want for this request, what sorting. For example, if we want to sort by votes, we can select that. It automatically updates the URL. And maybe you can also provide some tags. For example, I want only React Native tagged questions. So if I basically run this command, I'm gonna see information about our questions like tags, owner, and a lot of data that we actually don't need. So another thing that you can do here with their API is you can provide some filters. And by providing filters, like we limit the amount of data that we want to receive. For example, for a question, we actually will be interested in the body markdown. You don't have to do anything right now. I'm gonna give you the filter ID and most probably it will work. But what we are interested here, besides the default information, is in the body markdown. That's one thing that is missing from the current filter. So you can select it, press save. And now if I'm gonna, as you can see right now, there is no body markdown here. And if I'm gonna run it again, I hope to see the body markdown. Body markdown, it's here, yes. All right. What else? What else? Hey, Ankan, thank you very much for the donation. Love this content, also sometimes use TypeScript in builds. Yes, we are using TypeScript in a lot of builds, but this one was already so huge, like we're doing both user interface and the backend, so I decided to keep it simple with JavaScript. Okay, so going back, like here are all the rest of the useful links that we're gonna need, like the endpoint to get a question by ID, get all the answers for the question, filter to include. And yeah, here is some information about filters. So as I was saying, the filters are specifying like what data do we want to get back from the API. You can read more about that on your own time, but I have prepared here a couple of endpoints that we can copy from here. We can paste in a new tab, and this is going to basically, in my case, I have a Chrome extension that parses and prettifies the JSON. In your case, it might look like this. So what you can do is simply copy everything and maybe put it in some JSON pretty. parser or something like that, just to be able to see like the JSON in a normal format like this. So as we can see, this URL is querying the questions, is ordering based on the votes, querying only the questions with the tag React Native from the Stack Overflow site, and it has a filter ID that I have prepared for you, just for us like to get only the data that we actually need. And the data that we actually need is actually also documented here on our website. This is the data that we will need for our user interface. So now that we are more or less familiar with the Stack Overflow API and how it works, you can continue playing around in your browser by sending, like, for example, question by ID. If we send this query, it will render, it will give us a response with only one question. And the ID is part of a URL here. Pay attention that these code are remaining, because if you reach 0, you're going to be throttled and you're not going to receive a response, but it should refresh from time to time to back to 300. So as I was saying, querying this REST API, like building REST APIs on the backend is fine. But whenever we're building client-side applications, whenever we have to query the data from the backend, it's really not that user-friendly or developer-friendly to work with a REST API. It's fine, but I really prefer working with GraphQL APIs because of a lot of reasons. I'm not sure if you are subscribed to our newsletter. Yesterday I sent a newsletter about the benefits of GraphQL. So maybe I will leave a link somewhere in the description where we can actually make a separate video about that, talking about it, because there are a lot of benefits of GraphQL, but in a couple of words, a GraphQL API, when you query it from the front end, you can specify exactly the fields that you want. So for example, if on homepage you only need like the title and the body, you can build a query with this data. And if on the details page you also need the body and the tags and the details and the user who posted it, you can build a much larger query and the server will just simply return only the data that you are requesting. I think this is the best thing that I love about GraphQL, but it actually helps us with some other problems that REST APIs have. For example, a REST API has this problem of overfetching, basically of sending you more data than you need, and this is consuming a lot of bandwidth. Or a much more worse problem is the underfetching, when you are sending a query and you do not receive all the necessary data that you need, and after that you have to send multiple queries more just to receive information. So for example, with a REST API on the home page, we would have to send 2 queries, one to get the details about the question and the second one to get all the answers. And maybe if you need also details about the user, like for every answer you have to query the user. With GraphQL, we simply define like some relationship between our types. We tell GraphQL like, hey, this is how we want to create this relationship based on these fields or based on this query. And after that, like from our front end, we can simply create this complex query with nested objects that gives us the data that we actually need. And everything is going to be happening from one request. We're going to see some of these benefits in today's build, but before that, how can we work with a GraphQL when what we have is a REST API? So that's a good question. For that, what we're going to use is we are going to use StepZen. And StepZen, I want to remind, is the sponsor of today's video. But yeah, like I've been using them with other projects as well. So it's really easy to, first of all, convert like any kind of APIs, for example, a REST API to a GraphQL API, but this is only just one use case of StepZen. So if you look in some of these diagrams, like the REST API is only this small part that allows us to build a GraphQL API by integrating with one REST API. With StepZen, you can also integrate with backends, directly with databases, or even with other GraphQL APIs. And where it plays a helpful role specifically for enterprise solutions is in situations where you have decentralized teams and a lot of them are working on different APIs. For example, some of them are working on the orders API, some of them are on the customers. And at the end, you have to somehow federate, you have to somehow merge everything into one single API that front-end developers can query. So what you can do is, as you can see in this diagram, you can simply connect them together and let the teams be decentralized and not depending on each other, and only a thin layer on top of them to define the connection between it. So let's go ahead and create a new account. You can get to StepZen by following the link in the description. So creating a new account, I think you can do it with GitHub as well. So if you start for free, yes, just continue with GitHub and you're gonna be good to go. On the dashboard, what do we need here? Let's go here. So install and configure the CLI. Yeah, after creating the account, what we have to do is to install and configure the StepZen API. So let's open the docs from our guide. If you are logged in at this moment in the docs, like you're just going to be able to copy paste everything. So to install the StepZen CLI, all we have to do is to install with npm globally StepZen. So let's go ahead back in our project. I'm going to continue actually working here in this project. I'm going to, let me open a new terminal. And here let's do npm install -g StepZen to install StepZen CLI globally. After that is done, and yeah, the CLI is supported on Windows, Linux, OS X. After that is done, yeah, like at this point, if you don't have already, you can create one account. And what we have to do is we need the admin key and the API key in order to configure and set up StepZen CLI. So go ahead and do StepZen login in your CLI, in your terminal login, and here provide your account name and the API key. Actually, it's right here in the documentation. You don't even need to go to the dashboard, but if you're interested, you can go to the dashboard, and from the dashboard you can find all of these keys there. In the account, there you will find your account name and the, which one? The admin key, and the admin key, the second one. So just copy paste, put them here, and after that you can ask StepZen, who am I, to double check if you are logged in. Yes, I see that I am logged in. Perfect, we are ready with setting up and logging in with StepZen. The next step would be to get started and initialize the StepZen project. Nothing too complicated. What we have to do is, in a new folder, call StepZen init. We can create this backend as a separate package, as a separate repository from our mobile application, in case we want to keep them separate. Like, I don't know, if you also have a website, maybe you want to have an API separate from your mobile application. What I'm gonna do is to simplify everything and to have all the code into the same place. I'm gonna create a new folder in my React Native root folder called StepZen. And this is going to be our StepZen configuration for the API. Now, inside the terminal, let's go ahead and go inside StepZen, cd StepZen, and let's use StepZen init to initialize the project there. It will ask us what would you like our endpoint to be called. You can leave a default one, or you can say, I don't know, API Stack Overflow. Now if we look into the StepZen, there is this configuration file, which specifies the endpoint Stack Overflow. What we have to define here is the index GraphQL file. So let's go ahead and create this file, index.graphql. In the index.graphql, what we have to do is to specify what are other files that we have in our configuration. So where is them? This one. Oh, come on. So in the index GraphQL, just copy this part with schema. So it's basically schema, the directive SDL, where we will add all the files that we have in our for our API, and we define the query here. That's everything that we need at this moment. Now, usually what you'd have to do, and where StepZen makes it so easy to create GraphQL APIs from a REST API, is if you check the documentation here from transform REST to GraphQL, there is a command line command, StepZen import curl, that automatically, when you do it on an API, it automatically analyzes the response and the data and the request, and it will parse it and it will create the schema for you. So everything is, in that case, is super, super easy. I'm thinking maybe to try to show you how it happens. Yeah, let me actually do that, just for you to understand. Like, you don't have to do this, just watch me do it for a moment. And I'm gonna say like what we have to do for us. So I'm gonna do git add git commit -m init StepZen, just because I will, after that, I will want to delete it. So as I was saying, it's super easy to transform a REST API to a GraphQL API using StepZen. All we have to do is to do StepZen import and using the method curl, because it's a REST API. We can also use a database or maybe another GraphQL. And after that, provide our API endpoint. And if I open this one in a window, this is a simple API endpoint that returns like address, email, and so on. So yeah, let's just press enter and see the magic happening. Successfully imported curl data source into your GraphQL schema. What we see that is inside our StepZen, we have a new folder, customers with index GraphQL, that has all the types and also the query that we can execute and get our customers through a GraphQL API. It understood all the types that we have there. It understood all the fields that it returns. So this way, like, yeah, it's just 1 minute, you import with curl and you have your GraphQL API. And from here, what you can do is StepZen start to start your, to deploy and start your StepZen, which also happens very fast. And we can open this dashboard link that they provide us. And from here, we can start executing queries for our API. I'm going to have to select it from here, Stack Overflow. And as we can see, we have a customer query where we can get email ID and orders and so on. So it's a fully fledged GraphQL API that was built like in what? 1 minute, 2 minutes? Why I showed you this with customers and is because, yeah, let me first delete it, revert this customer thing, because we have to actually integrate, or should I leave it there just for us to have where to look back, but I don't need it. So I delete the customer folders, and in the index.graphql, where we specify the files, I can delete this one from here as well, because we deleted it. Yes, that's everything that we needed to handle it. And by the way, in order to see proper formatted GraphQL queries, what you have to do is to install the GraphQL extension. So make sure you have GraphQL extension. I'm not sure which one I have, but I have something. GraphQL syntax highlight. Maybe you can just choose the first one. So it will look like this. Now, what I wanted to say is that the StackOverflow API is a bit special. And it's special because it is compressed. So because the StackOverflow is compressed, it doesn't return JSON automatically. It returns compressed JSON, but we have to uncompress, and then we can parse the JSON. So that step actually prevents us from using the automatic StepZen import curl request that introspects the schema and automatically creates all the GraphQL schema. So we cannot use that at this moment, but I'm talking with guys from StepZen, and I'm pretty sure they will do it. And in future, you're going to be able to do it, I'm pretty sure. So the only thing that we have to do is to create and define the schema ourselves. And it's not that complicated. All we have to do is create a new file for our StackOverflow schema. So in StepZen, let's create a new file. StackOverflow.graphql. In our index GraphQL, make sure to import it inside these files. So let's specify StackOverflow.graphql. StackOverflow GraphQL. And inside this StackOverflow, what we have to do. Why did I close it? So inside this StackOverflow GraphQL, what we have to do is we have to start with queries. So query, let me just double check the syntax to make sure that we do it properly. So yeah, we start with a type query. Now you can actually start typing with me, and I'm going to explain like how everything works. And here inside the type query, we define what available queries we will have. For example, we might need a query to get all the questions. Okay, let's define that. Questions is a query that will respond with a type. The type is going to be questions response. Because we define it here, we need to define this type above to specify like, okay, what's the question response data will be, what fields it will have a response. Now, with some magic directives, GraphQL directives, we can connect this query to a REST endpoint. To do that, all we have to do is do add REST, and here we have to provide the endpoint that we want to query to get the questions in our GraphQL database. So the endpoint, it should be with double quotes. The endpoint is actually, if we look at the StackOverflow API here in our guide, there is the API endpoints for the list questions. So let's take this endpoint, because this is the endpoint that returns our questions. Let's put it here. And before we implement anything, let's execute this one here and see what do we receive. Well, we receive the response that we get back is some fields like has more, quota max, and quota remaining. Let me copy this from here, because this has more and so on. These are properties of our response. So we have to define them here in order to be able to query them. So let me remove the codes from here. And instead of values, what we have to do is specify types. So for example, a false is a Boolean. Quota max is an integer. And quota remaining is an integer. If we want to make them required, we can put the exclamation mark. If we know that they are required, if they will always be sent. So just having this one, we can go ahead and do again StepZen start if you haven't already. And this will start our API, and let's check if we have our first API endpoint running there. So let's open this dashboard StepZen in our browser. Make sure to select the name of your API here, StackOverflow. And if you look at the builder here, there is also the documentation that shows like what queries do we have in our application. And we see that at the moment we only have one query, questions. If we select builder here, we can right away create our queries. So if we select the questions, we see the three fields that we specified in our schema: the has more, the quota max, and quota remaining. So if I send this query, I see has more false, quota max 300, and quota remaining 248. All right, so that with that little schema, we already have connected and created a GraphQL API that will connect with our REST API and get the data from there. But now, if in our application we only need the property has more, we can delete everything else and specify exactly what fields we will need. So let's go ahead, let's go back and continue defining our types, because the question response, if we look at the API itself, besides the has more and these fields, has also this array of items. And this is actually what we are interested in, is in the array of items. So that means that question response has n items with an array of, this is the array, with an array of questions. Or let's do it singular, question. Now, that means that we have to define a type question here that will specify what fields will one question have. You can go ahead and see the fields here, but what I recommend us doing is to take the type, to copy the type from here, in order to save some time, not to write like all the types. I have prepared that for you. So let's take the type question from our schema and let's put it in our project here. So now the question has question ID, creation, title, markdown, and so on. Without doing anything, the API StepZen is actually watching our files and restarting the server every time we do some changes. So we can go back to our StepZen dashboard, click refresh here, and we see that now, besides these fields, we can also query the fields of our questions. For example, the title and what? The tags. If I query that, we see what is React Native and the tags, and so on. So that means that we are correctly parsing the REST response to a GraphQL type. And to double check if everything is working, you can select everything and make sure that it's returning, like it doesn't have any errors. And I see that everything is returning. Perfect. So querying the questions is done. The next step is whenever we, basically when we will be on the details page of one question, instead of sending a request to get all the questions, what we want to do is send a request to get the details of a question by ID. Because we know the ID, we just need the details about one question. If we look at the REST API, and if you look here, there is this documentation for the question by ID, and you can read it, or you can right away get the endpoint from here, from API endpoint for the question by ID, and this is the link. Just copy it from here, open it in a new tab, and press enter. What it does, it has the same structure with items as an array, but at this moment it only has one question here. And the ID of this question is sent through the URL here. So, knowing this information, let's go ahead and implement our GraphQL query that will give us the question. For example, question. It's, as I said, it looks the same. Like if you put together like a request for a question and request for all questions, the structure is the same. It has items and it has these properties. So I'm not gonna create a new type for question response because I'm gonna use the same one. The only difference is the REST endpoint. So for the REST endpoint, go ahead and grab the one from our guide here. So let's copy that, no, question by ID, this one. Get it and put it here. Now, without doing any changes, we can go back to our StepZen dashboard, we can refresh, and we see that in our queries, if I close these questions, we have a new query called question. And this one, if I'm gonna do title, it's going to be the question, specifically the one that we are querying there. Okay. That's cool, but how do we dynamically get the details of a question based on an ID? Because at the moment, the ID is hard-coded in our endpoint. This is the ID. Well, it's pretty simple to do that with StepZen. We can provide them the variables of our query here. So let's say that we want the question ID. Or should it just be ID? I don't know. It's going to be an integer type and it's required. And let's copy the name of this variable together with the $sign and simply in this endpoint replace the part of the endpoint that is the variable part, replace it with our question ID. So after the basically these numbers, replace it with question ID, and this will become the variable that we send as a GraphQL. So in this situation, what we can do is I'm gonna refresh, and we're gonna see that this question should request a variable. It doesn't need a $sign here. Yeah, in the variables here, it doesn't need the $sign, but where we replace it in the endpoint, it needs a $sign. So let's go ahead and refresh right now. And we see that the question request now expects an ID. So if I'm gonna take, like, I don't know, you can go directly to StackOverflow. Or like StackOverflow, come on, StackOverflow. Search something like React Native. Opens one of these questions and get the ID from the URL and go back to our dashboard and paste it here. And if I'm gonna take the title is what is the difference between using construct versus get initial state. And if we look, this is exactly the title from here. And that's true, like we can now choose another question with error running React Native app from terminal, get the ID from the header, put it here in our GraphQL query, run the query, and we see the title from that question. That means that we can dynamically send variables to only query the things that we want and to adjust like basically what information we are requesting. Perfect. And what you can do is you can go ahead and actually add more parameters. For example, if you look in this endpoint, there are some variables here that remains hard-coded. For example, how do we want to sort based on votes or based on activity? So this thing can be, for example, let me actually show you because it's quite easy. So what I want to do is, let's say that I want the, how to call it? This is the sort. So let's do sort will be a string for now. Now let's take this sort, but make it not required because I don't want, or should it be required? Yeah, let's do it required because otherwise it's not gonna work. I'm not sure how to do default values. So this sort, let's take it from there and replace our sort equal votes, the votes part, which is the value. Let's replace it with sort. Save. Now, if I do refresh here, not history, but refresh, our question query in the builder now has also this sort field, which we can say sort based on activity. Wait a second, why I'm doing this on the get question? Because this one doesn't need any sorting. I should have done it on the questions. So I'm gonna go back and add this variable actually on the question, like sort is string, and we replace here sort with $sign sort. So now if I refresh, and if I close this one but query the questions themselves, I can get, for example, the title and the score. And if I sort based on activity, you're gonna see that the score is 1, 0, 2, and so on. But if I sort on votes, then we see that it sorts by the votes. So now we can, from our GraphQL side, we can specify how do we want to sort the response. Now, to make it better, because now anyone can put here anything like blah, 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 and that will end in a bad request. Because if we look into the API of our questions, the sort can have activity, votes, creation, hot, week, and month. Do I have them somewhere here? Yeah, the sort accepts activity, creation. Let's do only these 4: activity, creation, votes, and hot. So if we want the sort value to only be one of these values, we can provide an enum here, enum, with the name is going to be question, or yeah, sort, question sort, and it's going to be activity, creation, and this one. Now, instead of string, if we say that this is going to be a question sort and also required, let me check if I don't have any errors. I don't. I can go back to our dashboard, refresh, and we see that in the sort right now, the value that we specified here is cannot represent non-enum value, something, something, something. So I can do it based on hot, for example. Can I? No. Yes. So it's even like a drop down here that we can specify. For example, if I do hot, it's going to only give me questions that are hot based on their own algorithm. Okay, so that's a little bit about our variables. Should I put someone on mute? Please stop spamming. I'm gonna try to. Okay. Let me. I see. So that was a little bit about the variables that we can use and send. You can go ahead and add more, for example, the order. Do we want descending or ascending? And yeah, that's it. I don't think that we need any more variables here. Let's go ahead and define the last endpoint that we're gonna need. And this endpoint is going to be the endpoint we will use to request answers. So it's gonna be answers. And for the answers, we're gonna get answers for a question. So we're gonna need the question ID as an integer, and it's going to be answers response. Answers response. Now let's define this answers response very similar to how is our question response. The only difference is answers. The only difference is the items will not be an array of questions, but an array of answers. Answer. Let's do it singular. Now let's define that type answer here. And what fields will the answer have? Again, I don't want to spend a lot of time finding all the fields. So we can scroll down until we get this answer with all the defined fields. We can copy it from here and paste it in our schema. And the last step is to connect our query with the REST API by using this REST directive and specifying the endpoint. The endpoint, again, you can use from this documentation that I provided with API endpoints. Here is the answers. If you copy it, you can open it in a new tab to see the data that you receive. So it's items with actual answers. Let's go ahead and put it here. And we need to make sure to replace the variable question ID in this endpoint. And the question ID, as you can see, is here, part of the path questions/ID/answers. So I'm going to replace this hard-coded number with the actual question ID. Make sure it's the same name as here. So now if I go into the dashboard, I can get the answers to a question. Which question? Let's take it for this one. It should be check out this link. So let's provide the value and the items. Let's take the body. So check out this link. It works correctly and it gives us the answers to this specific question that we queried. Okay, so far we see one of the benefits of GraphQL, being able to query only the data that we want, for example, like this. But another benefit of GraphQL is actually, as I said before, is whenever you need data from basically different database or from about different entities into the same screen, basically. In that case, with a REST API, you would have to do multiple queries. For example, on our details page, here we would have to send one request to get the information about the question and a separate request to get the information about answers. The benefit of GraphQL is that we can group together this and define these relationships and get this data into the same query. At the moment, if we are, for example, querying the question by ID, if I look at the fields that we have for our question, I see only the fields that we defined there, but nothing related to the answers of that question. Well, that's because we haven't defined the relationship between a question and an answer. And to do that, what we can do is we can use the materializer directive. First of all, we have to define a field. So the field is going to be answers, right? Answers is going to be an array of actual answers, the type that we define here. But at this moment, GraphQL doesn't know, like, okay, but how, for one question, how can we get the answers for it? Well, we know that in a like how I would do it is whenever I would need the answers for one question, we know the question ID and we can send a query, hey, get me all the answers for this question. And that's going to be the array of answers that we need here. That's exactly what we have to do, is using materializer. Did I write it correctly? I can open the documentation of materializer. It's here for connecting question and answers. Here is the documentation for stitching. Stitching different parts of API that can even live like on different databases and APIs and so on. So it's called, where is it? Materializer. Yes. So this materializer needs some fields. For example, the query, like what query should we run to get the answers for this question? Well, the query is called answers. So let's query the answers. And what arguments, or how do we want to send, like if this answer requires a question ID. So how do we send some data from here to the arguments of that query? So in the arguments, we can say it's an array of arguments where the name of the argument that we have to send here, question ID, is going to be taken from the field question ID here. So the name of the query, to what field are we mapping here? So that's it. But we will see that query answers has a type answer response, which cannot be assigned to answer. So basically what it says is that this query answers does not give us an answer, does not give us an array of answer. It actually gives us the answers response like this. And now I think it will work. But the thing is that we can actually get them specifically an array of items by saying that we want to access a subfield of the response of this query. So by specifying here that we only need the items from this response, they will be mapped and we will get an array of answers. And now it works. And if we go to our StepZen dashboard, and if I refresh, not to this one, if I refresh, whenever we query the question, I can query its data like title, and I can also query the answers to that question in the same query, body markdown. And if I send, we see error running React Native, and the first answer is check out this link. And there is another answer, and there is another answer, and all of them, like if you check with the actual question from StackOverflow, they are matching. They are exactly what we are looking for. So that's, at this point, Materializer helped us connect two models that are coming from the same API. And that might be trivial. But imagine the benefit of StepZen actually happens when you're working with multiple APIs where your data is distributed. So imagine some of the data is in database, some of the data is in a REST API, and maybe other is into another GraphQL that you are working inside your company. So with Materializer, you can connect, for example, a database model with the model that is coming from a REST, just by specifying like what query do you want to run. So it's really powerful to create these connections, and it actually works pretty well with federations where different teams are working at different parts of application, and without knowing about like what our team is doing, with StepZen you can connect their work together and have a master schema that has all the data of your API and all the connections using the Materializer. Okay, so I think that we are ready to actually go ahead and start querying, because we have all three queries that we have. We can query all the questions. We can query the question by ID. We can also get its answers right away into the same query like this. And if we need, for some reason, we can also query answers separately. We will not need that one because we can take advantage of GraphQL being able to retrieve data in one request, like from multiple parts of our API. So yeah, we're gonna only use these two queries. Whew, that was exciting. Let's go ahead and do git add, git commit, StepZen GraphQL. Yeah, let's just have a look in the comments. What are people doing? Take a small break and move on to the last part of this tutorial. So far, we have implemented the first two parts. We have built the user interface. We have converted the StackOverflow REST API to a GraphQL API. And finally, the third step is going to be to query our GraphQL API inside our application using URQL. So let me check. Yeah, everything is perfect. So guys, what do you think about everything that we're building so far? Ismail, about notifications. On YouTube, I don't have it. The notification, we will only cover it in our premium course. So if you're interested in more advanced mobile development, and if you're really serious and dedicated to learn and become a full stack mobile developer, then check out our course at academy.notjust.dev, where we go much more in depth into the crucial features that you have to implement when building full stack applications. So that one is really in depth, and it also has the notifications. The link you can find in the description below, of course. All right. How to clear backstack in Expo. When I move a screen, then I want to remove all other screens in backstack in Expo Router, or anyone in the chat. Do you mean you want to Expo Router. Give me just 1 second to look through the documentation. So if I understand your question correctly, what you're looking for is you want to navigate to a screen and prevent the user from going back, basically delete all the other screens. So in that situation, check out the guides authentication, and here there is this router replace. So instead of pushing to a new screen, you can do router replace, and that will replace all the existing screens in your stack with the one that you provide here. Then you get the router using the use router. Is this over? No, guys. We have one more step. We have to query our API. And this is going to connect our backend with the front end, and we're going to have real data from StackOverflow inside our application. So yeah, I think let's get started. Let me probably close some of the tabs that we will not need. I will authentication. I will leave only this the dashboard of our API. And we can move on to the next step. The last part in this tutorial, as I said, is going to be to query our GraphQL API from React Native. There are A couple of solutions, a couple of libraries that you can do, that you can use to query your API, your GraphQL API. The most popular one is the Relay from Facebook, but that one is quite opinionated and complex. There is also Apollo from GraphQL, like Apollo client from GraphQL. I've been using that quite intensively. That's actually what we are teaching in the course, Apollo client. But for the sake of this tutorial, I said like I want to try something new, a new library that is lightweight, that helps us query our API and is also extensible through different packages. So yeah, it's something that I'm also learning together with you. I checked it out. I think it's a pretty interesting library for GraphQL, and that's what we're gonna use today. I'm talking about the URQL. I think people pronounce it differently, but for the sake of making sure that I pronounce it at least somewhat correctly, I'm gonna spell it by letters, URQL. So the documentation you can find by following this link. So all we have to do is let's go ahead and install the URQL library and also the GraphQL library. So let's go ahead, open the terminal, make sure that you are in the root directory, make sure you're not inside the StepZen directory, and now go ahead and do npm install. Let's install URQL and GraphQL, and also provide the legacy pure dependencies because of some inconsistencies in why I'm having it like this. Yeah. We can continue initializing the client, but we will get into an error, and this error is actually not related to URQL because we get this error also with Amplify, and it's because like for some reason, like in our environment, like with Hermes, we do not have access to these async iterators. So what we have to do is to install this library and import it somewhere in our application. So follow the link there and let's simply install this core.js in our project, npm install core.js peer or legacy peer depths. And inside our index.js, let's go ahead and import it here. So let's import this symbol async iterator, make sure that our libraries have access to this async iterator. So let's do that and forget about it. Okay, moving on to the next step. What we have to do is we have to initialize the URQL client that is going to connect with our GraphQL backend. To do that, let's go ahead and where do we want to initialize it? Usually, if you were using React Navigation before, the place where we would set up these global providers was app.js. But as you can see, we do not have any app.js with Expo Router. And the global providers now will go into the underscore layout. This is our root layout, which will encapsulate all other screens from our application. And this is a good place where we can provide global providers. So, should we? Yeah, let's go ahead and actually separate a bit the concerns, not to put everything here. So what I want to do is in the source, let's create a new folder here for GraphQL. Inside source GraphQL, let's create a new file, client.js. This client.js is where we will connect with our backend. So let's go ahead and import, or let's actually take some code from the documentation of URQL. So here in the basic, in the React bindings, if we scroll down, we see here the default way of how we can initialize the client. Let's take it from here. Let's put it here and let's export default client. The URL is not localhost. The URL, we need to take the URL of our API. If we go to the page where we are running our API, you can scroll up until you find the URL, or you can stop the API. Yeah, stop the API and start it again, StepZen start. And this will tell us the URL. And the URL is this one. Here you can see, you can test. Yeah. So let's take the URL from here. It should be the name of your API, then it should end with GraphQL. Take it like this, and let's put it in our client. That way we say like, how do we want to connect to our API? If we're gonna try to do it, to query it right now, we're gonna fail because our GraphQL API requires the API key. So as you can see here in the curl that specifies like how we can connect, it also provides this authorization header. So let's go ahead and say, hey client, for every request that you're doing, make sure to use a header. So to do that, there is these fetch options that we can fetch options, headers, it's fetch options. We can do it as an object, and it has headers, and these headers has what? Headers is an object where we have the authorization, which is a string with API key space, and here we need to provide the actual key. To take it, you can execute this command StepZen whoIam -- API key in a new terminal. So StepZen whoIam API key, and grab it from here, put it here, and that's it. And this way we set up our GraphQL client to always, come on, close it, to always use this authorization API key whenever we are sending requests to our API. Okay, perfect. Now we have set up a client. We need a way to provide this client to the rest of our screens. As I said, to provide things, we are doing this in the layout. So here, let's go ahead and import the client that we just created. So client from GraphQL client, and also the provider from URQL. All we have to do is, using the provider component, we send to the value our client like this, and we encapsulate, oh, sorry, it should be, we should put it in the return statement and encapsulate our stack into this provider. Now all our screens from our application will have access to the client and will be able to send queries. If we look in the documentation, the way we send queries is using this use query hook, and we need the actual query that we have to send. So let's define in our GraphQL, let's define here a file called queries.js, where we will keep all the queries that we have right now. Later on, you can have like different files for all your queries, but for now, because we're going to have only 2 queries, let's keep them here. So what will be the queries? The workflow that I usually do is I go to this to the dashboard of my API, and I create the query based on what data do I need. For example, for the home page, I will need the questions. I'm not sure if I need this, has more code time remaining. Maybe you need, but what I need is the items. The items, I will take answer count because we have to display it here. Body markdown, the creation date is displayed in the UI. Basically everything that your user interface depends on is what data we need. Is answered, I don't need it here. Maybe later we can add it. Link, we also don't need it. Question ID, yes, let's use it as the ID of our flat list. Score, yes. Tags, yes. Title, yes. And view count, yes. After you have done this, you can actually run the query to make sure that everything is okay. And what you can do next is to simply copy your query from here. And let's bring it in our editor inside the queries. Let's create a new variable for questions query, which is equal to a GraphQL string, and this GraphQL tag we can import from URQL. We can define this string, and here we can paste our query. Make sure to also export this question query because we will need it in the next step to send the request and get this data. So, where do we send the request? Well, on the home page, which is our index.js inside our application, at the moment we're taking the questions from dummy data. What I want to do is to actually query them from our GraphQL API. So what we need here is a use query hook from URQL. We also need the query itself, get questions, or how did I call it? Questions query from source GraphQL queries. And let's put it together here in our body of our page. And we're gonna get some response. So the use query hook expects an object with the query where we can specify what do we want to query. This question query. Back from the use query, we're going to receive a tuple, basically an array of two values. The first one is the response, and the second one is the re-execute the query. So it's a function that will help us re-execute the query. I don't need it at the moment, but what I'm interested in is in this response. This response now has a couple of values. For example, it has a fetching value that will be true when we will wait for the response while the request is still loading. So in that situation, we can simply return an activity indicator. So now if I'm gonna refresh my application, but I need to actually run it. So npm start. And run it on iOS. Getter callback for component circle must be a function received and defined. What? Getter callback for component? React Native view config? What's going on? View config getter received and defined. How to debug it? Let's debug it together. Where is it coming from? I'm gonna start by commenting out this use query, and I already see where it's coming from the use query. If I uncomment it, it still works. Oh yeah, I know. The activity indicator was imported from React Native Web when it should be imported from React Native and deleted from here. So if response is fetching, return activity indicator. Now if I'm gonna refresh, you're gonna see that we have the loading indicator for a bit, and then after it's not longer fetching, it goes here. But it still doesn't render the items from there. So if we have a look at the response, this response will have, so the data for the flat list will be response.data. Then this data will have the information about the query itself. So it's going to be questions. And to access the array of those questions, as you can see, we need to access the items. So we have to do one more .items. So in the end, the data is going to be response, data, questions, items. So now, if I'm going to refresh, we see getting type error with Expo screen capture module when running. And this is a different one than our dummy data. And at this moment, we can go ahead and remove the dummy data because we no longer need it. We are fetching our API for the data. Another common thing that you do is you check if the response has error. In that case, you also want to display something to the user. For example, in a text view, I'm gonna say error, and here let's display response.error.message. So if something goes wrong, for example, if the query has count 1 to 3, we're gonna see the error cannot query field answer count 1 to 3 on type question. Did you mean answer count? Yes, exactly, that's what I mean. So now it works. So that's how simple it is to query our GraphQL API using URQL. Well, all we had to do is we have defined the client and specify how do we want to connect to our GraphQL API. We added some headers for our authorization, like the API key. We provided this client to all our application through the root layout using the provider from URQL. And then from any screen, what we can do is using the use query hook, we can get data from our backend, from our GraphQL API. Now let's do the same for the details page. So if I press here, we're gonna see that question not found because we no longer have this data in our dummy data. So let's go ahead and first of all, let's grab the query that I have prepared for you here for the get question query. So this query has information about the items and the information about the answers. So we're gonna get all of this in one query. Let's go ahead and open our source GraphQL queries and put it here. Make sure to also export it from here. Export const get question query. Double check like if it has all the fields that you need. You can double check it using your StepZen dashboard. You can build it here actually. And then what we have to do is inside the ID, inside the details page, which is this id.js file, we have ID here. We will have to import use query hook from URQL and the get question query from the queries. Now let's go ahead and get the response from our use query. And here what we have to do is we have to provide a query as the get questions query. But the thing is that besides the query, besides the query itself, we also have to send some variables, the ID of a question that we want to query. So what we have to do is in this options object of our use query, we can send variables as well. So the variable with the name ID is going to be this ID from the search params. Now we can remove this line that was looking for the dummy data. We can remove the import of dummy data and for answers as well. And what we can do is, let's check if response is fetching. I'm going to return the activity indicator from React Native. Make sure to import it from there. If response is error, let's return a text saying error, and the text, the error will be response.error.message. And lastly here, what we have to do is we have to get the question from that result. So it's going to be response.data. As I said, the next one is the name of a query, question dot, and then what do we have? It's the items, which is an array. It's items, which is an array, and we expect our question to be at position 0. So let's access it at position 0, but leave this check because maybe it was not found. So in that case, we still will receive this question not found. Now for the flat list, to get the answers, how we're gonna do it? Simply by getting question.answers. And should it be items or just answers? Interesting, I don't know. And for the header, we just have a question. So let's try to open the first one. Getting type error with Expo screen capture. If I send, we see it here, but we don't have any answers because that's actually like this question doesn't have answers. But you know what? Let's go ahead and, because when we are querying the questions, we can specify the sort. And the sort is a variable. So let's sort not by activity, but by the votes. We can do that right from our application. So inside our app index, where we have this question query, it shouldn't be question, it should be questions. Questions. So besides the query, let's also send some variables. Oh, come on. Variables. And I want to send the sort, which should be votes. Is it like this? Sort. Oh, here is activity. It's, yeah, the actual query does not have a variable because it hard codes it at this level. So back in our queries.js, for my query, we need to add here the variable sort that should be of type, of which type? If we have to look in our StepZen, StackOverflow, and here we have this question sort. Now, instead of hard coding the activity, we can send the sort here, sort. And it should be required. And now we see that the first one is one with the most votes and it has a lot of answers. And the cool thing about this is that now we can change here from sort votes to sort activity, and it will now sort by activity. And what you can do is you can have a drop down where the user will select like how he wants to sort. And you're gonna send this variable to your query based on a state variable, for example. So as I was saying, I want based on votes. And the first one here is the one with 45 answers. And we see what is the difference between React Native and React. And the first answer is the one that we were looking for. Amazing. Perfect. Perfecto. The only thing that I'm not sure is this part is going off the screen. And this is a common issue with Flexbox. So let's double check quickly the components. Answer list item. This is the left thing. This is the body container, which is the right one. So let's check in the body container. It's flex1. It should work. I don't know why it's not. Container, maybe some padding 10. Okay. That one worked. Hello, Alex. Yes, please. Do you want to say anything to our subscribers?
Please subscribe.
Alex is asking you to subscribe, guys. So if she said please subscribe, like, you gotta subscribe. So what does that mean? That means that we are querying all the data from our API, both on our home screen from the questions query and on our details screen from our get question query by sending the variable ID. And if I go on the different one, waiting, and we see the answer. Also like with images and so on. Perfect. If I go back, go to the first one back. And as you can see, if we're going back to a question that we already queried, we do not see the activity indicator. We do not see the question loading because URQL in our client, in our GraphQL client, we have this cache exchange that is actually caching our requests. So if this is not the first time we're sending the request, it actually will read it from cache and will not even reach our backend. And this way is going to be very efficient and very fast. And only like for new questions, it will load and wait a bit until it receives the data. So yeah, that's perfect. So cheers, guys. Do you want to see maybe the search query? How to implement the search functionality? That would be some extra features because we are mostly done with everything that we have planned for today. So let's go ahead and actually do git add. Query our GraphQL API using URQL. Should we do a search query? I think we should because that's the most important part of Stack Overflow. Nobody is going to Stack Overflow to look at the homepage. You always go there to look for something. So this is going to be a very cool extra feature of this application that we can do on the fly and we can together think and implement it both on our GraphQL API on our StepZen side to connect it with Stack Overflow API and also on our application where we will be able to basically search for new items. What I'm gonna do is let's start with some of the screens that we're gonna need. I think I'm gonna leave the home screen as it is right now, not gonna touch it, but I'm going to create a new file for our search. So in our application, let's create the search.js. And here let's do React Native functional export. How will we get to this screen? One way I'm thinking is in the layout, to add on this homepage a search icon to the right. To do that, what we can do is, first of all, let's find the Expo vector icon for the search. Search. For example, this one looks okay. Let's import ndesign in our root layout. And let's take the rendering part of ndesign. And for our index, where is the home? Besides the title, let's also do header right. And on header right, let's render this icon. 24 probably is too much, so let's do 20. And maybe not black, but dim gray. Yeah, I think that looks okay. Now, if I press, nothing happens. But what we can do is we can wrap our ndesign inside the link. And we can do href, and the path, as I said before, the path is the name of a file. So it's /search. Make sure to import link from Expo Router. And here, wait a second. And here, now if I'm gonna press on this, we're gonna go to the search screen. And we can go back to home. While we're still here, I'm gonna cover one more stuff. Let's rename this screen from ID with a proper name. To do that, in your stack, we have to specify the title of our stack.screen. We target the screen that we want to configure using the name of a file. So name equal, the name of the file is ID, and the options our title is, I don't know, question. Like this. Now if I press, it should be question on the top. Perfect. Perfecto. What's going on with our UI? It's kind of broken for some reason. There is one question that is kind of broken, like this one. No idea why, but not a biggie. So, moving on to the search page. What will we need on this search page? Well, on this search page, we can should we add like just a simple. There are two options. It's either working with a manual text input or working with a search box inside the search bar here. So to do it inside the search bar, I have a code here. If you scroll up until we see something related to search inside the UI, here, search input inside header. You can look at the documentation of React Navigation, and it specifies like how we can set the header search bar options and to configure like our search bar to have our header to have a search bar. So let's go ahead and copy this use layout effect, and maybe also the navigation and also the search term, all of them. And let's drop it inside our search page here. So now let's go ahead and make sure to import the use state from React, also the use navigation, not use navigation, but use layout effect. And the use navigation should be imported from Expo Router. So Expo Router, use navigation, and we have here a function search. We should be const search. Let's do console warn search, and here the search term. So now if we're going to go to the search page, we have this search bar at the top, which we can write into. And when we press enter, we have a search here at the bottom. So if you want to do it this way, we can do it this way. Or if it's not working the way you expect, just simply create a text input here inside your view. Okay. So now that we have a page, the next step is going to be to, whenever we press enter, to actually do a request to our GraphQL and to search for something. Well, let's start from our end API, from our StackOverflow API. Let's go ahead and open the documentation of StackOverflow API and scroll down until we see something about search. So if I scroll down to what? Questions, search for the site questions meeting certain criteria. Let's do search. And here you can read some of the documentation, but something interesting is that it has this property in title. So if, like, that's how we're gonna search, based on the property that is in title. So if I am looking for something like, I don't know, undefined is not a function, let's try to run it. And we have some questions with this title. It has the title, why I'm getting undefined is not a function error, and so on. So we're gonna use this in title. And what else? Search activity, maybe not activity, but maybe based on votes, to find the one with the highest votes. And yeah, that's it. I think it's okay. Let's copy. Basically, you can press on this URL. It will open in a new tab, and we can copy it from here. And I'm gonna go ahead and actually put it inside this document. Filter, the filter part. So if you look at this query, it doesn't have a filter. It has a default filter. What you are interested in is to this queries to add the, where is it? This part, the filter with ID of this filter, to get exactly the data that we need, like with a body and so on. But I put it here so you're gonna be able to, let's wait a couple of seconds. It should refresh quite soon. And yeah, here it is. So I put it here in the search, so we can copy it from our documentation, from our step-by-step guide. If I put it here, we see responses with title, undefined is not a function. Perfect. Now let's go ahead and connect our StepZen and define a GraphQL endpoint for this query. So in the StepZen, Stack Overflow GraphQL, let's add, inside the queries, let's add a query search. This search will have a term or like something that we want to search, and it's going to be a string. The answer, I'm not sure yet what's the answer, but we can have a look. If I do it like this, it's items, has more, and the items are questions. So we can reuse the questions response, because back we're gonna get a questions response, an array of questions. Now let's define the rest part of how do we want to get this data. And to do it, just copy paste from API endpoints this URL. Let's put it here. And let's replace the hard-coded in title field here inside this URL. Where is it? That I said undefined is not a function. Make sure to replace it with $sign and the variable term. So $sign, where is it? $sign term. Now, if your StepZen start is still running in your console, you can check or you can restart it. Now we can go to the StepZen dashboard. We can refresh and we see that we have a search query. And here we can search for what? Give me an error. I don't know. React Native View. And if I'm going to take the answers and maybe also the quota remaining to see what's going on there. And if I'm going to look for the title of answers, we see React Native View Auto with, React Native View on Press, React Native and so on. So that means that our query is working. And what we have to do is, let's grab the query from here. Inside our source GraphQL queries, let's go ahead and define this export const search query equal GraphQL and then string, and here we paste the query. The thing is that maybe we don't need to query the quota remain, but the data about the question should be more than the title. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take all the information from here, because we are going to reuse the same UI components as on the home screen. So we need all of this data, and I'm going to paste it inside the items. This way, every question will have all of this data. Now, let's go ahead and import this search query in our new page inside application search. Let's do, but the thing is that we do not need a query, we need a lazy query. So a query will fire as soon as our component basically re-renders. In our case, we don't want to do that because that would mean that every time we type something with every letter, we're going to send requests to the API, and that's going to be a lot of requests. What we want to do is whenever we basically press enter in this field, that's when we want to execute the query. So when we want to execute a query on demand, when a user does something, that's called a lazy query. So let's see if URQL has a lazy query, which I'm pretty sure it does. Matt G is saying, learning a lot about GraphQL steps and stuff. Thank you, Vadim. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. It's really, really powerful. So query, run a first query. Let's use query. That's variables. There is in some cases we want to re-executing queries. Is your QL like Apollo client? Yes, it's like Apollo client, but it's way more lightweight. It's, if you're looking at them, it's I think more than twice as smaller than Apollo client. So lazy. Okay, UI patterns, you lazy query. It's often required to lazily start a query either at a later. Yes, that's what we're. This means that we don't start a query when a new component is mounted in the middle. Parts of that automatically starts, like use query hook, have a concept of pause option. This option is used to prevent the hook from automatically starting a new query. So I think it's gonna work with pause. We can unpause the hook to start fetching, or, like in the example, call its return function to manually kick it off. To call this fetch, to kick it off. Yes, I think that's what I pause through, and then we call this fetch. Yes. Okay. So in our search, we have a search term. We need to define the use query. Use query. The query is going to be our search query that we have to import from GraphQL queries. We defined it recently. And as we saw, we also have to say that we want to pause it. We don't want to execute it before we write something. Then we get back the result and the fetch, right? Something like that. Now inside the search, what we want to do, I think we can do variables here, and term should be our search term. We need to double check if our query actually has a variable. No, it has a hard-coded variable. So let's make sure to send this variable here as term, which is a string, and we replace the hard-coded with this variable term. Now from our page we can send variable term from the state that the user writes, and we fetch it when we call this search. Now we need to check if result fetching, we need to show the activity indicator. Where is it was imported from? Again, from the web. We need from React Native. If result error, then we need to say text error, and let's display the result.error.message. Otherwise, what we want to do is, let's first of all render the search term. So search term, or it's gonna be there. I don't need it. I just simply can render a flat list from React Native with the questions that we got back. So the data is going to come from result.data, then dot the name of a query, which is search, then items to get the array of items, and for render item, let's go ahead and for every question render a question list item, this one. The question list item also needs the question itself, that we get it from the item. And the last step is to add the view style background color, white, and flex 1. Let's check it out. If I go here, cannot read property search of undefined. And this is also going to be if result.data.search is not defined, then let's return a text, I don't know. Um, I don't know. Search for a question. I'm so bad at this. Can create property search if result data search. If result.data is undefined, in that case we don't have data yet. But if I'm gonna write here, I don't know, undefined is not a function, and I press enter, we see cannot return null for question body markdown. Undefined is not a function. What's going on with this body markdown? If I open, it's gonna answer if I open here StepZen dashboard, and if I select the body markdown in this one, it says null, cannot return null for non-nullable field markdown. It should be, this is the filter, but it doesn't have a body markdown. Why the filter is not applying here? That's a bit weird. I don't know if I'm gonna do some changes. It's filter and filter. For us it's site and filter. Maybe I copied the filter incorrectly. Most probably I did. Because the filter is the one that specifies what data, so it should end with KV. It's the same here. It still has this owner. What's going on? Four questions here. Oh, it shouldn't be this one. Oh, I used two different filters. It should be the one for the questions. Sorry, guys. It should be this one with 0. Actually, I should have used the same filter, but I created two separate filters. One for questions and one for answers. And this one has a body markdown. So the only difference is that in our StepZen here, in the endpoint, I have to update the filter to reflect, to have a filter that we were using for the questions. Now, if I'm gonna refresh my application, if I do here, undefined is not a function, enter, we see type error, undefined is not a function, uncaught type error, undefined is not a function. And all of that, they are sorted by number of votes. So the first ones would most probably tell you why that is happening. So with that being said, we have, and I think we can also look for something else. I don't know, JavaScript versus TypeScript. Let's search. React Native performance, JavaScript versus TypeScript. It's actually because we have here, besides the term, we have, no, we don't have. Not sure why it's only related to React Native. No, actually it works. Perfect. Now we also have search functionalities in our API. So I'm gonna go ahead and do git add, git commit -m search. And this is also working from front end, back end, and so on. And if we cancel, we can go back to our homepage. How many of you saw the homepage of Stack Overflow? Alright guys, so we are approaching the end of today's video. I really hope you enjoyed this and you learned something new, because it was really packed with value. We covered a lot, both from the front end, building this application using React Native, using Expo Router, and parsing like Markdown and working with quite complex data. And also on the backend side, by analyzing the REST API that Stack Overflow is providing us, by creating a GraphQL layer on top of that API using StepZen, we managed to do everything in just 4 hours. I want to thank you again, StepZen, for sponsoring this video. I really enjoy working with it. It's really easy to create GraphQL APIs, and I wish to include it in more projects in future for whenever we have to work with GraphQL APIs. Because there are a lot of other things that StepZen can do besides converting a REST API to a GraphQL API. You can also build APIs there. You can connect with databases. You can federate multiple GraphQL APIs, and that's really powerful, especially in brownfield applications where you have existing APIs out there. So hello Katalin, how are you doing? We are closing it up today. It was a crazy build, 4 hours. Pretty exciting week, like so much work, and I'm so happy on Friday when everything is completed successfully. I can relax for a bit and probably tomorrow get back to work. So guys, if you have any questions, now is the time. We can spend 5 minutes, but I think I'm so tired that I really want to get into the weekend. For this filter problem, I just go to ChatGPT. I am still a new developer. That's a good solution. Like, go ahead. I'm not sure like how, but it should know. Like, the Stack Overflow API was public for a long time, and I think ChatGPT should somehow be able to understand it. The problem would be to understand why it's happening and how to ask the question properly. Katalin, so sweet. Like a real father. Did you read some повесть? See, I'm done. I'm finished. Yes. Where are you based? I'm based in Spain at the moment. Hey buddy, how to become a pro in React Native? Well, you should check the academy at notjust.dev, academy.notjust.dev, if you want to become a pro React Native developer and build full stack mobile applications, both on front end, back end, connect them and build quite complex applications. Check it out. The link is in the description below. And thank you very much guys for watching till the end. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, become a part of a 1% club, the people who are watching these tutorials and are subscribed. We are only 1%. So yeah, I'm gonna see you next week because we go live every single Friday and I'm super tired. I cannot think anymore. All right guys, so thank you, bye bye, have a nice weekend, let's go.